The certified letter landed on my doorstep like a bomb disguised as correspondence, and when I tore it open during my lunch break, I discovered the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association had fined me $3,000 for constructing an unauthorized racing facility on my property. I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at the document signed by one Patricia Montgomery, HOA president, and felt my blood pressure climb. The letter detailed how my flagrant violation of community standards was creating noise pollution, property devaluation, and general disruption to the peaceful suburban environment we'd all agreed to maintain. It demanded immediate payment and the complete removal of what they called my Speedway within 30 days, or they'd begin legal proceedings and daily accumulating fines. The thing is, I'm Preston Fitzgerald, and I've served as county commissioner for Riverside County, Indiana for the past 6 years. Part of my job involves approving road construction permits, zoning variances, and yes, reviewing and authorizing the very subdivision roads that Patricia Montgomery drives on every single day in her pristine white Lexus SUV. My property sits on 2.5 acres at the edge of Meadowbrook Heights, a development that went up about 8 years ago. I'd bought the lot before the HOA really flexed its muscles, back when the community was still finding its identity. The previous owner had been elderly and let the land sit mostly unused, but I'd always had plans for it. I'm a car enthusiast, always have been. My garage house is a 1969 Camaro SS, a modified 2015 Mustang GT, and a project Porsche 911 that I'd been restoring for 3 years. What Patricia Montgomery called a speedway was actually a private quarter-mile track I'd built on the back portion of my property. I'd consulted with engineers, had soil tests done, installed proper drainage, and even added sound-dampening berms around the perimeter. The construction had cost me close to $80,000, and I'd dotted every single I and crossed every T with the county planning department. Because, I literally work there. I pulled out my phone and called my office. My assistant, Rachel, picked up on the second ring. Commissioner Fitzgerald's office. Rachel, it's me. Can you pull the file on my property permit from last year? The one for the track? Sure thing. Give me just a second. I heard her fingers flying across her keyboard. Okay, got it. Permit number 202477734, approved by the Planning Commission on March 15th of last year. Inspection passed on September 2nd. Everything looks clean. Why? Is there a problem? The HOA seems to think I built a NASCAR stadium in my backyard. They just fined me $3,000. Rachel laughed, then realized I wasn't joking. Wait, seriously? But you have all the county permits. The HOA can't supersede county approval. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Thanks, Rachel. Can you email me a copy of that file? Sending it now. I hung up and reread Patricia's letter. The language was condescending and absolute, as if she'd never considered that someone might have actually followed proper legal channels. The letter cited various HOA bylaws about modifications, requiring board approval, about maintaining property values, about noise restrictions. What it didn't cite was any actual legal standing to override county-approved permits. My phone buzzed, email from Rachel with all my documentation attached. I opened my laptop and started reviewing everything. The permits were rock solid. I'd even had an acoustic engineer certify that my sound levels wouldn't exceed county noise ordinances when measured from neighboring property lines. The nearest house was 400 feet away, well beyond any reasonable complaint threshold, and the track was only operational during permitted hours. I decided to call Patricia Montgomery directly. Her number was on the HOA website, listed under board contacts. She answered on the third ring, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that comes from years of telling people what to do in a subdivision of 200 homes. This is Patricia. Mrs. Montgomery, this is Preston Fitzgerald. I received your letter today about Mr. Fitzgerald. Good. I'm glad you're taking this matter seriously. The board met last Thursday, and we were unanimous in our decision. That racetrack is completely unacceptable. It's not a racetrack, it's a private automotive testing facility, and I have all the proper county permits. Her laugh was sharp and dismissive. County permits are irrelevant to HOA regulations. When you purchased property in Meadowbrook Heights, you agreed to abide by our covenants and restrictions. Those clearly state that any major property modification requires board approval, which you did not obtain. I bought this property 7 years ago, before half of your current restrictions were even written. The bylaws were updated 4 years ago with a supermajority vote. All residents received notification. Your failure to stay informed doesn't exempt you from compliance. I felt my jaw tighten. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm the county commissioner. I literally approved the permits for this project through proper legal channels. The HOA doesn't have the authority to. I'm well aware of your position, Mr. Fitzgerald, and I find it deeply concerning that someone in public office would so blatantly disregard community standards. If anything, you should be held to a higher standard. The fine stands. You have 30 days to remove the facility and pay the assessment, or we'll proceed with legal action and begin daily accumulating fines of $500. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, genuinely stunned. In 6 years as commissioner, I'd dealt with difficult people. I'd mediated disputes, handled angry constituents, negotiated with contractors who thought they could cut corners. But Patricia Montgomery was something else entirely. She wasn't just confident, she was absolutely convinced of her authority, even in the face of contradicting information. I spent the rest of my lunch break researching HOA law in Indiana. The legal landscape was more complex than I'd expected. HOAs did have significant power to enforce their covenants, but those powers weren't unlimited. They couldn't violate state or federal law, and they couldn't supersede government permits for legal activities. The problem was that fighting an HOA often meant expensive legal battles, and most homeowners simply couldn't afford to challenge them. But I wasn't most homeowners. That evening, I was out in my garage working on the Porsche when my neighbor, Dave Mitchell, stopped by. Dave was retired military, early 60s, with a no-nonsense attitude I appreciated. He lived 3 houses down, and we'd become friends over the years, bonding over classic cars and weekend barbecues. "Hey, Preston, got a minute?" Dave looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. "Sure, what's up?" I wiped my hands on a shop rag and grabbed 2 beers from the garage fridge, handing him one. "Got a weird call from Patricia Montgomery this afternoon. She was asking me questions about your track, whether I'd heard excessive noise, whether I felt it was impacting my property value, that sort of thing." Let me guess. She was fishing for complaints. Exactly. I told her the truth, that I barely notice it and you only run cars out there maybe twice a month during the day. She seemed disappointed. Dave took a sip of his beer. "Preston, what's she planning?" I showed him the letter. He read it, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. $3,000? For a properly permitted facility on your own property? That's insane. She claims the HOA authority supersedes county permits. Does it? Not even close. But she's banking on me either not knowing that or not wanting to fight about it. Dave handed the letter back. She's been getting worse lately. Last month she tried to fine the Robinsons because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Wrong shade. Linda Robinson had to bring paint chips to a board meeting to prove it matched the approved color palette. I heard about that. Thought it was a joke. I wish. Patricia has turned this HOA into her personal fiefdom. Half the neighborhood is terrified of her. The other half has just given up and goes along with whatever she wants to avoid the hassle. Well, I'm not doing either. I pulled out my phone and showed Dave the permit documentation. Everything I did was legal, approved, and properly inspected. If she wants a fight, she's picked the wrong person. Dave grinned. Good. Someone needs to stand up to her. Just be careful. Patricia doesn't lose gracefully, and she's got some allies on that board who'll back her no matter what. After Dave left, I spent the evening drafting a response to the HOA. I kept it professional but firm, outlining my county permits, the legal inspections, and the fact that the HOA had no authority to override legitimate government approvals. I cited specific Indiana statutes about HOA limitations and included copies of all my documentation. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. 3 days later, I got Patricia's response. She'd escalated. The new letter informed me that the board had voted to pursue immediate legal action. They were filing for an injunction to halt all use of the track pending a court review, and they'd increased the fine to $5,000 plus attorney fees. The letter was longer this time, filled with accusations about my abuse of public office, my disregard for community welfare, and my setting a dangerous precedent. Reading between the lines, I could tell Patricia had consulted with a lawyer, but probably not a very good one. The legal threats were vague, and the statutory citations were either misapplied or irrelevant. It was the kind of letter designed to intimidate, rather than to actually build a legal case. I called my own attorney, Marcus Webb. Marcus and I had gone to Indiana University together, and he'd built a solid practice specializing in property and municipal law. When I explained the situation, he laughed for a solid 30 seconds. "Preston, this is the dumbest thing I've heard all month. You have county permits. You had inspections. You're operating within noise ordinances. The HOA has absolutely no leg to stand on." That's what I thought, but she's threatening court. Let her. Honestly, if she files this, the judge is going to toss it in about 5 minutes, and she'll be on the hook for your legal fees. But I think I can end this faster. Give me a day to draft something. Marcus was true to his word. The next afternoon, he sent me a copy of the letter he'd mailed to Patricia Montgomery and the HOA board. It was a masterpiece of legal clarity. In 4 pages, Marcus methodically dismantled every claim the HOA had made, cited the relevant case law showing HOA covenants couldn't override government permits, and pointed out that pursuing frivolous legal action could expose the board members to personal liability. The last paragraph was particularly pointed. It suggested that if the HOA continued this harassment, I would have grounds to sue for abuse of process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of my civil rights. Marcus estimated damages in the low 6 figures and noted that HOA board members could be personally liable if they were found to be acting in bad faith. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find a crew installing speed bumps on Ridgemont Drive, the main road leading into my section of Meadowbrook Heights. This wouldn't normally be notable, except that Ridgemont Drive is a county-maintained road, not an HOA road. The subdivision streets were private and maintained by HOA dues, but the main thoroughfares had been dedicated to the county as part of the development approval process. I parked and walked over to the work crew. The foreman, a guy named Tony, who I'd worked with on county projects before, saw me and looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Commissioner Fitzgerald, didn't expect to see you here." "Tony, what's going on? Ridgemont is a county road. Who authorized this work?" That's the thing. I got a work order from some lady named Patricia Montgomery. She said it was approved by the county, and she had the authorization to request the installation. "Do you have the work order?" Tony pulled out a tablet and showed me. The work order had been submitted through the county's online portal, and it had been approved by someone in the Public Works Department. But something was off. The approval signature was electronic, and when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't properly authorized. Whoever had approved it hadn't checked whether the HOA actually had the right to request work on a county road. "Tony, I need you to stop work immediately. This isn't properly authorized." "Commissioner, I've got a schedule to keep. If there's a problem with the paperwork, that's above my pay grade." "I understand, but I'm telling you right now, as the commissioner who oversees this department, this work order is invalid. The HOA doesn't have the authority to request modifications to county roads." Tony sighed and pulled out his phone, calling his supervisor. After a 5-minute conversation, he turned back to me. "All right, we're pulling out, but this is going to create a mess with scheduling. Send me the details and I'll make sure your company isn't penalized for the delay. This isn't your fault." After the crew left, I drove directly to the county offices. Even though it was after 5, I knew several people would still be around. I found Jerry Kowalski, the Public Works Director, in his office reviewing plans. "Jerry, we need to talk about a work order that went through today." I explained the situation. Jerry pulled up the file on his computer, his expression growing increasingly annoyed as he read through it. This shouldn't have been approved. The person who signed off is new, probably didn't realize that HOAs can't request work on dedicated county roads. But Preston, there's something else here you need to see. He turned his monitor toward me. Patricia Montgomery had submitted not just 1 work order, but 5. In addition to the speed bumps, she'd requested stop signs at 2 intersections, a reduced speed limit on 3 streets, and traffic calming measures near my property. Jerry, these are all county roads. How did she even get access to submit these requests? The online portal is public. Anyone can submit a request. The system is supposed to catch invalid submissions, but if someone doesn't know the difference between HOA roads and county roads, they might approve it by mistake. I'll send out a memo tomorrow clarifying the procedure, and I'll personally review any requests related to Meadowbrook Heights. Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it. I drove home frustrated. Patricia wasn't just fighting me on the HOA level anymore. She was trying to manipulate county resources to make my life difficult. The speed bumps on Ridgemont would have made accessing my property more annoying, and the reduced speed limits were clearly targeted at me. This was personal now. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find 3 messages from Patricia Montgomery. I didn't bother listening to them. Instead, I had Rachel set up a meeting with our county attorney, Susan Harper. Susan had been with the county for 15 years and had seen just about every kind of legal dispute imaginable. Preston, Rachel mentioned you're having issues with your HOA. I laid out everything. The initial fine, Patricia's escalating threats, the fake work orders, all of it. Susan listened carefully, taking notes. Okay, here's where we stand legally. The HOA is clearly overstepping. They can't override your county permits, and they definitely can't submit false work orders to the county. That latter part is actually potentially criminal, depending on how it's characterized. But here's the political angle you need to consider. I'm listening. You're an elected official. Patricia could try to turn this into a narrative about you abusing your position, using county resources for personal benefit, that kind of thing. It doesn't matter that it's not true. If she's smart, she could make this messy for you politically. So what do you recommend? Document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every communication. Keep it all professional and by the book. And whatever you do, don't use your position as commissioner to directly retaliate against the HOA. If you're going to fight this, fight it as Preston Fitzgerald the homeowner, not as Commissioner Fitzgerald. But she's the one who tried to use my office to get unauthorized work approved. Exactly, and that works in your favor if you handle it correctly. We can refer the matter to the prosecutor's office to investigate whether she violated any laws with those work orders. But you need to stay above the fray. Let the system work. Susan was right, but it was frustrating. I'd done everything correctly, followed every rule, and now I had to be even more careful just because Patricia was willing to bend or break those same rules. That evening, I decided to attend the HOA board meeting. They were held monthly at the Meadowbrook Heights Clubhouse, a fancy building that the HOA had built with special assessments 5 years ago. I'd never bothered attending before because I'd never had issues, but tonight I wanted to see Patricia operate in her natural habitat. The clubhouse meeting room was set up like a small courtroom, with the 5 board members sitting at a raised table at the front and rows of chairs for residents. About 20 people were scattered through the room when I arrived, most looking either bored or resigned. Patricia sat in the center of the board table, with 4 other members flanking her. To her right was Brenda Sutherland, a woman in her 50s who always seemed to be wearing tennis clothes, and Martin Keller, a middle-aged accountant who'd moved into the subdivision 3 years ago. To Patricia's left were Gloria Chen, a retired teacher, and Robert Hoffman, who owned a local insurance agency. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw me walk in, but she didn't acknowledge me directly. I took a seat in the back row and waited. The meeting started with standard business, approval of last month's minutes, financial reports showing the HOA's healthy bank balance, discussion of landscaping contracts, and pool maintenance schedules. It was all painfully boring, and I could see why most residents didn't bother attending. Then Patricia moved to new business. Item 7 on tonight's agenda concerns ongoing violations within the community. As many of you know, we've been dealing with a resident who constructed an unauthorized racing facility on his property, creating noise and safety concerns for the entire neighborhood. She wasn't naming me, but everyone knew who she meant. A few people turned to look at me. The board has attempted to work with this resident to resolve the issue amicably, but he has been uncooperative and has even threatened the board with legal action. We take the safety and property values of this community very seriously, and we will not back down from enforcing our covenants. Gloria Chen raised her hand. Patricia, I understood this resident has county permits for his facility. Is that correct? County permits are separate from HOA regulations. Our covenants clearly state that major modifications require board approval, regardless of other permits. Martin Keller added, we consulted with our attorney, and he confirmed that our covenants are legally binding contracts. Every resident agreed to them when they purchased their property. I raised my hand. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed glass. Yes, Mr. Fitzgerald, I stood up. I'd like to address the board if I may. This isn't a public comment period. Then I'd like to request one. As a resident and dues-paying member of this HOA, I believe I have the right to speak. Several other residents murmured agreement. Patricia clearly wanted to refuse, but she couldn't without looking petty. Fine. You have 3 minutes. I walked to the front of the room. Thank you. I want to address several mischaracterizations that were just made. First, I didn't construct an unauthorized facility. I obtained all proper county permits, had professional inspections, and complied with every legal requirement. Second, I haven't been uncooperative. I've responded to every letter the HOA has sent, and I've provided extensive documentation showing that my facility is legal and compliant. Third, I haven't threatened anyone. My attorney simply explained the legal reality, which is that HOA covenants cannot override government permits. Brenda Sutherland jumped in. But you didn't get HOA approval before starting construction. I didn't realize I needed it for a facility that was entirely legal under county ordinances, and that doesn't violate any legitimate HOA restrictions. The covenants I agreed to when I bought this property 7 years ago didn't include the requirement for board approval on county-permitted improvements. That was added later. Patricia's face was reddening. The bylaw updates were properly noticed and voted on. I'm not disputing that, but applying those retroactively to a project that was already permitted through the county is problematic. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to understand what rule I actually violated that gives the board the authority to fine me thousands of dollars and demand I tear down a facility that cost me $80,000 to build legally. Robert Hoffman, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Can I ask a question? Preston, how often do you actually use this track? Maybe twice a month, always during daytime hours, always within the county's noise ordinances. And where is it located on your property? The back 2 acres, behind natural berms that provide sound dampening. The nearest neighboring house is over 400 feet away. Robert turned to Patricia. Have we received any noise complaints from actual neighbors? Patricia shuffled papers. The principle is about property values and community standards, not just noise complaints. That's not what I asked. Have we received complaints? Several board members have expressed concern. Board members who don't live near Preston's property, Gloria Chen noted. I drive past his house regularly. I've never heard anything that seemed excessive. The meeting was getting away from Patricia. I could see her struggling to regain control. This discussion is beside the point. The violation is clear. The resident did not obtain board approval before proceeding with a major modification. The fine stands, and if it's not paid within the deadline, we'll proceed with legal action. Martin Keller nodded in agreement, but I noticed Gloria and Robert exchanging uncertain glances. Brenda seemed to be taking her cues from Patricia. I returned to my seat as the meeting moved on to other topics. Afterward, as people were leaving, Gloria approached me. Preston, I want you to know that I've had concerns about how this situation has been handled. Patricia presented this to the board as a clear-cut violation with multiple neighborhood complaints. What you're describing doesn't match that narrative. Gloria, I appreciate you speaking up. I'm not trying to cause problems for the HOA or the board. I just want to use my property legally. I understand. I'm going to request that the board table any further action until we can get an independent legal opinion, not just from Patricia's chosen attorney. Thank you. Robert joined us. I'm with Gloria. Something doesn't add up here. Patricia's been pushing this hard, and now I'm wondering why. Over the next few days, I learned the answer to Robert's question. Patricia Montgomery lived 4 houses down from me on Maple Crest Lane, but her property didn't border mine, and she couldn't even see my track from her house. What I didn't know was that 6 months ago, Patricia had tried to purchase the vacant lot adjacent to my property. She'd wanted to expand her yard and had made an offer to the owner, an elderly woman named Helen Foster, who'd inherited the land from her parents. Helen had refused to sell. She liked knowing the land would stay undeveloped, preserving a natural buffer in the subdivision. Patricia had apparently been furious and had tried several times to change Helen's mind, even getting other board members to pressure her about maintenance of the vacant lot. I learned all this from Helen herself. She called me one afternoon, her voice shaky. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I hope you don't mind me contacting you. I got your number from the HOA directory. I wanted to warn you about Patricia Montgomery." "Mrs. Foster, what's going on?" "She came to my house yesterday. She told me that if I sold her my lot, she would make sure the HOA stopped causing problems for you. She said you were a troublemaker who was hurting property values, but that she could make it all go away if I cooperated." My stomach tightened. "She tried to use my situation as leverage to get you to sell?" "Yes, and Mr. Fitzgerald, I'm 83 years old. I don't need this kind of stress. I've gotten 3 letters from the HOA in the past month about supposed violations on my lot. Overgrown grass and unpermitted tree removal, things that aren't even true. I think she's harassing me." "Mrs. Foster, would you be willing to document these conversations? Maybe provide a written statement?" "I would. I'm tired of being bullied. My late husband served on an HOA board years ago, and he always said the role was about serving the community, not controlling it. Patricia has forgotten that, if she ever knew it. Thank you, Mrs. Foster. I think your information might be very helpful." I immediately called Marcus, my attorney, and told him about Helen's call. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Preston, this changes things significantly. If Patricia is using the HOA to pursue a personal vendetta and to coerce another homeowner into a property transaction, that's not just overreach. That's potentially actionable. I'd like to talk to Mrs. Foster directly if she's willing. I'll have her call you." That evening, I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. I filed a formal complaint with the county prosecutor's office regarding Patricia's submission of unauthorized work orders for county roads. Susan Harper, the county attorney, helped me draft it to make clear I was acting as a concerned citizen, not as a commissioner. But I included my full knowledge of how the work order system was supposed to function. The prosecutor's office took it seriously. Within a week, an investigator named Detective Lisa Warren contacted me to discuss the complaint. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Riverside, away from the county offices. "Commissioner Fitzgerald, I've reviewed your complaint and the supporting documentation. I want to make sure I understand the situation. This HOA president submitted work orders for county roads that she had no authority to request?" "Correct. Ridgemont Drive and several other streets in Meadowbrook Heights are dedicated county roads. They're maintained by the county, not the HOA. Only authorized county personnel or properly designated entities can request modifications to those roads. And Ms. Montgomery isn't such an entity." "No. She used a public portal that's designed for citizens to report issues like potholes or broken signs. She misrepresented her authority by submitting work orders as if they were legitimate county requests." Detective Warren made notes. "What do you believe her motivation was?" "Harassment. She's been trying to force me to remove a legal permitted facility from my property. When that didn't work through HOA channels, she attempted to use county resources to make my life more difficult." "That's a serious allegation. I have documentation for everything. The work orders, the timeline of her HOA actions, witness statements from county employees who can confirm the work orders were inappropriate. I'll need all of that. Commissioner, I have to ask about the optics here. You're an elected official in a dispute with a constituent. How do I know this isn't you using your position to retaliate?" I'd expected this question. "Detective, I filed this complaint as a private citizen, not as a commissioner. Anyone who reviewed those work orders would have seen they were inappropriate. The fact that I happened to work for the county gave me knowledge of the problem. But the actual violation exists regardless of who I am. Patricia Montgomery attempted to manipulate government resources for personal purposes. That's wrong whether the victim is a commissioner or anyone else." "Fair enough. I'll investigate. This might take a few weeks." While the investigation proceeded, the HOA situation continued to escalate. Patricia sent another letter, this time demanding I appear before the board for a formal hearing regarding my continued violations. The hearing was scheduled for the next monthly meeting, and failure to appear would result in additional fines and immediate legal action. Marcus advised me to attend, but to say very little. Let them make their case. Don't give them ammunition. And remember, Gloria and Robert seem to be wavering. If they break from Patricia, you might be able to resolve this at the board level without going to court. The night of the hearing arrived. The clubhouse meeting room was more crowded than usual. Word had spread through the subdivision that there was drama, and people who'd never attended a meeting before showed up to watch. Patricia called the meeting to order and quickly moved to my hearing. Tonight we're addressing the ongoing violations by Preston Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald, you're here to explain why you believe you should not be held accountable for violating HOA covenants. Actually, Patricia, I'm here because you demanded my presence, but I'm happy to address the board's concerns. The board has determined that your automotive track violates Covenant Section 12, subsection 4, which prohibits commercial activities on residential properties. We believe you're using this facility for commercial purposes. This was new. She was changing her argument. I'm not conducting any commercial activity. The track is for personal use only, Brenda Sutherland chimed in. But you're a public figure. You could be using the facility to entertain business associates or to gain political favor. That constitutes commercial use. It was absurd. That's not what commercial use means. I'm not charging admission. I'm not running a business. I'm not generating income. I occasionally invite friends to drive on my private property. That's not commercial. Martin Keller held up a printout. We have evidence that suggests otherwise. This is a photograph from social media showing multiple vehicles on your property during what appears to be an organized event. He passed the photo to me. It showed my track from a high angle, probably taken with a drone, during a Saturday last month when I'd invited 5 friends over for an informal car meet. We'd spent a few hours testing our cars and then had a barbecue. It was completely private and personal. This was a private gathering with friends. No money changed hands. No admission was charged. It's no different than someone hosting a pool party or a backyard barbecue. Patricia pounced. But those activities don't involve high-performance vehicles creating noise and safety hazards. The photograph clearly shows this was a large gathering that exceeded reasonable personal use. 5 friends is a large gathering? By that standard, anyone who has a dinner party is violating the covenants, Gloria spoke up. Patricia, do we have any evidence of actual commercial activity, advertising, fee collection, anything like that? The pattern of use suggests commercial intent. That's not evidence, that's speculation. Robert added, I'm uncomfortable with us making decisions based on what someone might potentially do rather than what they've actually done. Preston has denied commercial use, unless we have proof otherwise. I don't think we can make that claim. Patricia's face was flushed. The board voted on this fine before tonight's meeting. This hearing is merely to allow Mr. Fitzgerald to present any mitigating factors. I wasn't informed the decision was already made, Gloria said. When did this vote happen? Last week via email. I don't remember seeing that email. It went to board members who were available. Robert's expression darkened. Patricia, are you saying you took a vote without including all board members? The 3 board members who voted represent a quorum. But that's not proper procedure. All board members are supposed to be included in votes unless they've recused themselves or are absent. The meeting was falling apart. Other residents were murmuring, and I could see several people pulling out their phones, probably texting about the chaos they were witnessing. Gloria stood up. I'm calling for a motion to table all action regarding Preston Fitzgerald's property until the full board can review the matter properly and with input from an independent attorney, not just Patricia's chosen counsel. Seconded, Robert said immediately. Patricia looked panicked. That's not on tonight's agenda. I'm making it an emergency motion. All those in favor? Gloria and Robert raised their hands. Brenda and Martin didn't. The vote was tied, which meant the motion failed. But the damage to Patricia's authority was done. Half her board was publicly questioning her leadership, and the entire room had witnessed it. After the meeting, multiple residents approached me to express support. Several mentioned they'd had their own problems with Patricia's aggressive enforcement style and were glad someone was finally pushing back. One man, Thomas Wright, told me he'd been fined $500 because his trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though he'd just forgotten to bring them in after work. She drove by, saw them, took photos, and had a violation letter in my mailbox the next day, Thomas said. I paid the fine because I didn't want the hassle, but it felt like entrapment, like she was driving around looking for violations instead of trying to maintain a nice community. The stories kept coming. A woman fined for hanging a wreath on her door during a non-holiday season. A family fined because their teenage son's car was improperly parked in their own driveway. A couple threatened with legal action because their fence was 3 inches too tall, even though it had been approved by the previous board. Patricia had created an environment of fear and resentment, and I'd inadvertently become the focal point for all that frustration. 2 weeks later, Detective Warren called me. "Commissioner Fitzgerald, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've determined that Ms. Montgomery did violate county ordinances by submitting false work requests. The work orders were written in a way that implied she had authority to request county resources, which she didn't. We're recommending charges." "What kind of charges?" "Most likely misuse of government resources and filing false documents. They're misdemeanors, but they're on the record. The prosecutor's office will be sending her a summons for a court appearance." I felt a mix of vindication and concern. "Detective, I want to be clear. I'm not interested in seeing Patricia Montgomery destroyed. I just want her to stop harassing me and other residents. I understand, but once the investigation uncovered violations, we have an obligation to proceed. What she did wasn't just about you. She wasted county resources, created confusion in the Public Works Department, and set a bad precedent. If we don't address it, others might think they can do the same thing." She was right. This wasn't personal anymore. It was about maintaining the integrity of county systems. The news of Patricia's charges spread through Meadowbrook Heights like wildfire. Within days, I started hearing from more residents who wanted to share their HOA horror stories. An informal group started meeting at a local restaurant to discuss options for reforming the HOA or potentially removing Patricia from the board. I attended one of these meetings, held at a sports bar called Rookies on the edge of town. About 30 residents showed up, filling 2 large tables in the back room. The organizer was a woman named Jennifer Pearson, who'd lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 10 years and had served on the Architectural Review Committee until Patricia had removed her for being too lenient. "Okay, everyone, thank you for coming," Jennifer started. "I think we all know why we're here. The HOA has become toxic under Patricia Montgomery's leadership, and it's time for change. The question is how we make that happen." Someone asked, "Can we just vote her out?" Jennifer shook her head. "Not directly. Board members serve 2-year terms. Patricia's term doesn't end until next spring. However, the bylaws do allow for a recall election if 20% of homeowners sign a petition." "How many signatures is that?" "The subdivision has 187 homes, so we'd need about 38 signatures. That's doable, especially given how many people are fed up." Thomas Wright raised his hand. "What about the other board members? Brenda and Martin have been backing Patricia on everything." "We can recall them too if we want, or we can wait and simply vote them out when their terms expire. Gloria and Robert have both indicated they'd support reforms if Patricia is removed." I'd been listening quietly, but Jennifer turned to me. "Preston, you've been dealing with this head on. What do you think our strategy should be?" "Honestly, I think the recall petition is the right move, but we need to be strategic about it. If we come across as a mob trying to overthrow the board, we'll lose credibility. We should frame this as concerned residents wanting responsible leadership. Document everything, every unreasonable fine, every aggressive enforcement action, every example of Patricia overstepping her authority. Build a case that shows this isn't about one person's grievance. It's about a pattern of behavior that's harmful to the entire community." Another resident, an older man named Frank Delgado, added, "We should also propose specific reforms. Show people we're not just complaining, we have solutions. Limit the board's fine authority. Require independent review before legal action. Create an appeals process for residents, that kind of thing." The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, we'd formed committees to gather signatures, document HOA abuses, and draft proposed bylaw amendments. The energy in the room was palpable. People were tired of being afraid of their own HOA. Over the next month, the recall petition gathered momentum. Signatures came in quickly, far exceeding the required threshold. Eventually, 63 homeowners signed, representing over a third of the subdivision. The stories they shared while signing were remarkably consistent. Patricia Montgomery had turned the HOA into her personal enforcement agency, targeting anyone she disagreed with and ignoring reasonable requests for leniency or common sense. Patricia tried to fight back. She sent a lengthy email to all residents claiming the recall was organized by disgruntled rule breakers who wanted to turn Meadowbrook Heights into a lawless community. She accused me specifically of using my position as commissioner to orchestrate a political attack against her. The email was so over the top that it actually helped our cause, making her look desperate and unhinged. The formal recall election was scheduled for a Saturday in early November. It would be a simple vote. Should Patricia Montgomery be removed from the board? A majority of homeowners had to participate for the vote to be valid, and a simple majority of those voting would determine the outcome. The week before the election, Patricia's criminal case went to court. I didn't attend, but I heard about it from Detective Warren. Patricia had accepted a plea deal. She'd plead guilty to the reduced charge of misuse of government resources, pay a fine, and complete community service. She'd avoid jail time, but she'd have a conviction on her record. The plea deal included an interesting condition. As part of her community service, Patricia would have to attend a course on civic responsibility and the proper use of government resources. The judge apparently had strong feelings about people who tried to manipulate public systems for personal gain. On election day, I voted early and then spent the day working in my garage, trying not to obsess over the outcome. The polling location was the clubhouse, open from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Volunteers from the informal reform group staffed the location, ensuring everything was fair and properly documented. Jennifer called me at 7 that evening. "Preston, we won. It wasn't even close. 112 people voted and 93 voted to recall Patricia. She's off the board." I felt a wave of relief. That's great news. How did Patricia react? "She didn't show up to vote and hasn't responded to any communications. I think she knows she's done." "What happens now?" "The bylaws say the remaining board members appoint a replacement to serve until the next regular election. Gloria and Robert are already talking about recruiting someone who actually cares about the community instead of controlling it." The next few weeks brought rapid changes to Meadowbrook Heights. With Patricia gone, the board took a completely different tone. Their first action was to formally withdraw all fines and legal threats against me. Gloria called to apologize personally for how the situation had been handled. "Preston, I should have spoken up sooner. I knew Patricia was overreaching, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I'm sorry." "Gloria, you found your voice when it mattered. That's what counts." The board also established new procedures limiting fine authority, creating an appeals process, and requiring board votes to be conducted in properly noticed meetings with all members present. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day HOA operations, removing the temptation for any one person to wield too much power. Brenda Sutherland and Martin Keller both resigned from the board shortly after Patricia's recall, apparently unwilling to serve without their ally. The board appointed 2 new members, including Jennifer Pearson and Thomas Wright, who'd both been active in the reform effort. My case with the HOA was formally closed. The board sent a letter acknowledging that my track was properly permitted and didn't violate any legitimate covenant restrictions. They even apologized for the stress and expense the dispute had caused. But the story wasn't quite over. In early December, I received a visitor at my home. It was Patricia Montgomery. She looked smaller somehow, less imposing than she'd seemed during our battles. Her face was drawn, and she seemed exhausted. "Mr. Fitzgerald, may I have a moment of your time?" I considered refusing, but decided to hear her out. We stood on my front porch, both of us bundled against the Indiana winter cold. "I wanted to apologize," Patricia said. "Not with excuses or justifications, just a genuine apology. I let my role on the HOA board consume me. I started seeing every deviation from the rules as a personal attack, and I responded by trying to control everything. What happened with your track wasn't really about the track at all. It was about me feeling like I was losing control." "Patricia, why did you really fight this so hard? It wasn't just about control." She was quiet for a moment. "When I tried to buy Helen Foster's land and she refused, I felt humiliated. I told my husband we were going to expand our property, told our friends, even mentioned it at a garden club meeting. When Helen said no, I looked foolish. Then I saw your track being built, this big, expensive project, and I felt like you were flaunting how much more successful you were. It was petty and stupid, and I took it out on you and on the whole community. That's quite an admission. I'm in therapy now. Part of coming to terms with what I did means making amends where I can. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I know I can't undo the damage. But I wanted you to know that I understand I was wrong. I looked at this woman who'd caused me months of stress and expense. She'd been arrogant, vindictive, and had abused her authority, but standing there on my porch, she just looked human and flawed. Patricia, I appreciate you coming here. I do, and I hope you find a better path forward. But you need to understand something. What you did didn't just affect me. You made dozens of people in this community afraid of their own HOA. You fined people for trivial things, you bullied elderly homeowners, and you used your position to settle personal scores. The apology to me is one thing, but you owe apologies to a lot of people. I know. I'm working on a list. I've already apologized to Helen Foster, and I plan to reach out to others. It's going to take time, and I know some people will never forgive me. But I have to try. She left after that, walking slowly back to her car. I watched her drive away and felt something unexpected. Pity. Patricia Montgomery had let power and ego destroy her reputation and relationships, and she'd have to live with that. Christmas came and went. I hosted a party at my house, inviting friends and neighbors. For the first time, I opened up my track for guests to see. About 20 people came through, most of them curious about the facility that had caused so much controversy. They were surprised by how professional and contained it was. Several people commented that they'd expected something obnoxious and intrusive, but instead found a well-designed, thoughtfully constructed private track. Dave Mitchell brought his son, a college kid named Eric, who was studying mechanical engineering. Eric spent an hour asking me questions about the track design, the drainage system, and the sound-dampening berms. He was fascinated by the engineering challenges I'd solved. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this is incredibly cool. Do you think I could come back sometime and take some measurements? I'm doing a senior project on private automotive facilities, and this would be perfect for my research." "Sure, Eric. Just coordinate with your dad and we'll set something up." Watching Eric's enthusiasm reminded me why I'd built the track in the first place. It wasn't about ego or showing off. It was about having a safe, legal place to pursue a hobby I loved. The fact that Patricia and the HOA had tried to frame it as something harmful or destructive had been absurd from the start. In late January, I received one more piece of news about the HOA saga. Marcus, my attorney, called with an update. "Preston, you remember I sent that letter to the HOA, warning them about potential liability for their actions?" "Of course." "Well, 3 other homeowners have now filed complaints with the board about previous fines and enforcement actions they felt were unjust. The board is reviewing everything Patricia did during her tenure, and they're finding a pattern of problems. They're considering refunding fines and issuing formal apologies." That's good to hear. There's more. One of those homeowners is talking about suing Patricia personally for harassment and abuse of authority. The HOA's insurance company is investigating whether Patricia's actions fall outside the scope of her board duties, which could mean she's personally liable. "I'm not interested in piling on, Marcus. I know you're not, but this is bigger than you now. Patricia created real harm and people want accountability. That's not about revenge, it's about justice." He was right. The HOA situation had never really been just about me and my track. It had been about an abuse of power that affected an entire community, and the consequences of that abuse were still unfolding. By February, things had settled into a new normal. The reformed HOA board was functioning smoothly, focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. The subdivision felt different, lighter somehow. People were friendlier, more willing to chat with neighbors, less worried about being reported for trivial violations. I continued using my track occasionally, usually on weekend mornings. The sound was barely noticeable from neighboring properties, just as the acoustic engineers had promised. No one complained. In fact, Several car enthusiasts from the subdivision asked if they could bring their own vehicles to try the track, and I started hosting informal monthly meetups. It became a community amenity of sorts, bringing together people who shared an interest in automobiles. Helen Foster invited me over for tea one afternoon in early March. Her house was charming, filled with photographs and memories from decades of life. We sat in her sunroom, looking out over her undeveloped lot. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I wanted to thank you for standing up to Patricia. I know it wasn't easy, and I know it cost you time and money." "Mrs. Foster, I should be thanking you. Your willingness to document Patricia's harassment of you was important evidence that this wasn't just about me. Still, you could have paid the fines and torn down your track and avoided all the trouble. The fact that you fought back gave other people courage to speak up. Sometimes, standing on principle costs something, but it's worth it." Helen smiled. "My husband used to say that. He was a teacher, taught history at the high school for 40 years. He always told his students that democracy requires citizens willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient." You reminded me of him. As spring arrived, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The fight with the HOA had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also revealed something important about community and power. Patricia Montgomery hadn't started out as a villain. She'd been someone who took on a leadership role and gradually lost sight of what that role was supposed to serve. The power of the HOA had corrupted her judgment, turning her into someone who valued control over community. But the response to that corruption had been equally revealing. When residents finally had enough, when they decided to organize and push back, change happened quickly. The systems were there, the recall process, the bylaws, the democratic structures. They'd just been dormant until people chose to use them. In April, the subdivision held its annual Spring Festival, a tradition that had been started years ago but had become perfunctory under Patricia's leadership. The new board decided to revitalize it, turning it into a real community event with food trucks, live music, and activities for kids. They even asked if I'd be willing to give rides on my track as part of the festival. I agreed, and on a sunny Saturday morning, I found myself taking groups of residents on slow tours of my track, showing them what it was actually like. Parents brought their kids, teenagers gawked at the cars, and even some of the people who'd been skeptical about the track admitted it was impressive. Jennifer Pearson found me during a break between ride groups. "Preston, this was a great idea. People are seeing that your track isn't the monster Patricia made it out to be." That was kind of the point. Fear and misinformation caused most of the problems. Actually showing people the reality helps. "The board wants to talk to you about something. Would you have time next week?" "Sure. What's it about?" "They want to offer you a position on the HOA board. One of the appointed seats is coming up for election, and they think you'd be great." I considered it. 6 months ago, I'd never wanted anything to do with HOA leadership. But now, having seen how much impact the board could have, both positive and negative, I understood the importance of good people being willing to serve. "Let me think about it. I'm pretty busy with county commissioner work, but maybe I can make time." That evening, I sat in my garage with a beer, looking at my cars and thinking about the journey from that first threatening letter to where things stood now. The track was legal and accepted. The HOA was reformed and functional. Patricia had faced consequences for her actions. The community was healthier. But more than any specific outcome, what mattered was the principle. When someone abuses authority, when they use their position to bully or control others, the answer isn't to give in or to accept that nothing can change. The answer is to stand up, to organize, to use the systems and processes that exist to hold power accountable. I'd built my track because I loved cars and wanted a safe place to enjoy them. I'd fought for it because it was legal and right. In the process, I'd helped reform an HOA and reminded a community that they had power too. My phone buzzed. Text from Dave Mitchell. "Hey, just heard the board asked you to join. You should do it. Community needs people like you willing to do the work." I texted back. Thinking about it would mean less time in the garage. His response came immediately. "True leader sacrifice. Plus you can write HOA policy on breaks between working on the Camaro, multitasking." I laughed and finished my beer. Maybe I would join the board, not because I wanted authority or control, but because I'd learned that good governance requires people willing to serve for the right reasons. To help, not to dominate. To facilitate, not to restrict. To remember that an HOA exists to serve the community, not the other way around. 2 weeks later, I accepted the board position. My first meeting was cordial and productive. We discussed playground equipment repairs, an updated landscaping contract, and plans for the summer community picnic. It was boring and routine, which was exactly how HOA business should be. Gloria Chen, now serving as board president, smiled at me after the meeting. "Welcome aboard, Preston. I think this is going to be good for everyone." "Thanks, Gloria. I just hope I can help keep things on track." "You already have. Just by standing up when it mattered, you changed this community. Now, we get to keep building on that foundation." As I drove home that night, I passed the spot where Patricia's unauthorized speed bumps would have gone if the installation hadn't been stopped. The street was smooth and clear, maintained properly by the county through legitimate channels. It was a small thing, but it represented something larger: the importance of systems working correctly, of authority being used appropriately, of people having the courage to speak up when something goes wrong. My track sat waiting behind my house, a symbol of both my victory and my principles. I'd fought for the right to use my property legally, and I'd won. But more importantly, I'd helped create change that benefited everyone. Sometimes being a county commissioner meant approving road projects and managing budgets. Sometimes it meant standing up to someone who thought the title of HOA president made them untouchable. Both were about serving the community, about making sure power was used responsibly. As I pulled into my driveway and saw my garage doors ahead, I felt satisfied. The battle had been difficult, but it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for every homeowner in Meadowbrook Heights who'd been living under Patricia Montgomery's reign of petty tyranny. The county commissioner who approved their roads had also helped free them from an HOA president who'd forgotten what leadership actually meant. In the end, that was a pretty good outcome. I spent the rest of the evening in my garage working on the Porsche restoration project I'd been neglecting during all the HOA drama. The engine was finally coming together, each piece fitting perfectly after months of careful work. It was meditative and satisfying, a reminder that some problems can be solved with patience, precision, and the right tools. Around 10, Dave stopped by with a six-pack. "Thought you might want company." "Always. How's Eric's project coming?" "Great. He's using your track as his primary case study. His professor's really impressed with the engineering documentation you provided." "Happy to help. It's nice when something good comes from all that permitting work." We sat in lawn chairs in the garage, drinking beer and talking about cars, community, and the strange turns life takes. Dave had been there through the whole HOA battle, offering support and perspective when I'd needed it most. "You know what the craziest part of this whole thing is?" I said. "If Patricia had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. The track would have stayed my private hobby. I'd never have attended an HOA meeting, and she'd still be board president." "Pride goes before a fall," Dave quoted. She couldn't stand the idea of someone doing something she hadn't approved. That need for control destroyed her. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. She made her choices, and a lot of people suffered because of those choices. The consequences were appropriate. Dave raised his beer. To appropriate consequences and properly permitted racetracks. I'll drink to that. The following months settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA board met monthly, dealing with ordinary subdivision issues without drama. I used my track occasionally, hosting small groups of car enthusiasts who appreciated having a safe legal venue to test their vehicles. My work as county commissioner continued, with the added benefit of being able to point to the Meadowbrook Heights situation as an example of how proper permitting protects both individuals and communities. Patricia Montgomery moved out of the subdivision in June. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had decided a fresh start somewhere else would be best. I never saw her again, but I heard she'd continued her therapy and had apparently found some peace. Helen Foster continued to refuse any offers to purchase her vacant lot, enjoying the natural buffer it provided and the wildlife that inhabited it. She told me once that standing up to Patricia had been empowering, reminding her that age didn't mean powerlessness. The community thrived under reformed HOA leadership, Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement, but because people genuinely enjoyed living in a neighborhood where the association helped rather than harassed. It turned out that treating residents like adults capable of maintaining their own properties worked better than constant surveillance and punishment. By the time my first term as county commissioner was up for re-election, I had a story to tell about standing up for principle, about fighting government overreach even at the local level, and about the importance of proper procedures and legitimate authority. The voters appreciated it, and I won re-election with a comfortable margin. My track became something of a local legend, not because it was grand or impressive, but because of the story attached to it. It represented the idea that doing things the right way, following proper procedures, and standing up for your rights actually matters. In an era where cynicism about institutions ran high, that was a message people wanted to hear. And on warm summer evenings, when I'd take the Camaro out for a few runs around the track, the sound echoing off the berms I'd carefully engineered, I'd think about how close I'd come to giving in. How easy it would have been to just pay the fines, tear everything down, and avoid the fight. But I hadn't, and that made all the difference. Because ultimately, this wasn't a story about a track or an HOA or even about me. It was about the principle that authority has limits, that power requires accountability, and that ordinary citizens have the ability to demand both. Patricia Montgomery had tried to use her position to force compliance with her personal preferences. She'd forgotten that the HOA existed to serve the community, not to control it. And when she'd pushed too far, the community had pushed back. That was democracy at its most basic level. Messy, frustrating, time-consuming, but ultimately effective. As I locked up the garage that night and headed into my house, I glanced back at the track one more time. Tomorrow I'd agreed to let Eric and 3 of his engineering classmates come measure and photograph for their academic projects. Next weekend, the monthly car meet would bring together a dozen enthusiasts from across the county. The track that had started as a personal project had become something more. A gathering place, an educational resource, a symbol of standing up for principle. Patricia Montgomery had tried to destroy it and had instead helped it become more meaningful than it ever would have been otherwise. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well and using your rights responsibly. And sometimes, being the county commissioner who approves the roads gives you just enough perspective to recognize when someone is abusing their own small slice of authority. I'd used my knowledge and position not to retaliate, but to stand firm on principle and to help reform a broken system. That felt right. That felt like what public service should be. And my Speedway, properly permitted and legally constructed, would be there for years to come. A reminder that doing things the right way matters, even when it's the harder path, especially when it's the harder path.